There once was a big patch of grime, a world that had been lost to time. We scrubbed all the muck, then back came the ducks, and now the land's looking real prime. Hey guys, James here again with another game review, and today I want to talk about Terra Nil, a city building puzzle game where you attempt to bring life back to a barren planet, one patch of grass at a time. While it's classified as a city building game, I think it might actually be more accurate to call it a terraforming game, or maybe a landscaping game. The campaign takes you through a series of different regions, each with their own biomes and approach. When you enter a new map, you're presented with an arid and polluted landscape. You'll then have to go through 3 phases, which I call the 3 Rs, to reclaim the wasteland. The first is what I call the restoration phase. During this phase, you have to establish your basic infrastructure and clean the land of pollution. The overall idea is actually pretty simplistic. You'll first need to generate electricity using turbines or deep sea generators. This then allows you to connect some toxic scrubbers, which cleans nearby earth and water. Once you have a clean patch of soil, you can then irrigate her with the irrigator and watch as the money flows in.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk. Dollar, dollar.
During this phase, you'll also be able to terraform, such as by creating canals or shifting land around so that you can place more buildings. Additionally, after the tutorial stage, you'll be able to manipulate the weather, which, among other things, can help you achieve some optional objectives that give you some more of that money. These will also add a little bit more life to your world. Once you hit a certain threshold of restored tiles, you'll then enter the second phase, which I call the reintroduction phase. During this phase, you have to create different biomes on the map so that flora and fauna can be reintroduced to the world. Many of the buildings in this phase are built upon the infrastructure you set up previously. Once you have enough of each biome, you then move on to the third phase, which I call the research and recycling phase. During this phase, you'll have to research the newly created world, identifying animals that return to the region. This is done by scanning areas, and depending on the type of tiles within your scan, you might find a cute little critter. Then, once you're all ready to go, you have to recycle everything. It's handled a bit differently from region to region, but in general, you have a vehicle of some sort which needs to access and recycle all nearby items. This whole process can be quick and easy, such as when you have a flying drone, but some stages actually require you to get a little bit more methodical. In all phases of the game, there are 3 main ideas which permeate throughout, which, funny enough, I also call the 3 Rs. The first is requirements. Just about every building will have certain requirements for them to be placed. So, for example, the turbine can only be placed on rocks. When it comes to the biomes, an example would be tundra, which can only be placed on an irrigator at the top level of the map. It also can't be too humid or it won't grow. Meanwhile, forests require a higher level of nutrients. So, if you want to make them, you'll first have to burn down everything you know and love so that the roots can feed on their nutrients. The game also rewards you with a bonus for creating biomes in ideal weather conditions, so definitely be aware of the requirements. The second R is for range. As you probably noticed, every building has a certain range which they can affect. Turbines can only provide energy so far, scrubbers can only clean so much, and irrigators can only create so much of that green. Similarly, with the biomes, there's a limited range which each building can affect. In many cases, there are also limitations on how close you can have duplicates of certain buildings as well. The final theme, and maybe the main theme of the entire game, is the idea of recycling. As you play, you'll notice that a lot of your objectives require you to use and reuse things, destroy something only to build it back up again. And I think it's these 3 Rs that really define how the whole puzzle aspect of the game feels. Since each map you generate will be slightly different, a lot of the planning and building you'll need to do is going to be dictated by these 3 Rs. The game, especially at higher difficulties, becomes about efficiently covering as much area as possible, while also doing things in the right order so you can meet these different objectives. I think if you take it a bit at a time though, you should be fine. And yeah, while I wouldn't say that the game is difficult at all, not that it was really meant to be, but I do think you may need a bit of trial and error to figure out how to approach different maps. Luckily, not only can you restart phases or the whole map, but you also get a nice undo button to take back the last turn. I did notice some bugs with this button though, where you might lose access to the area that you originally placed the building. Overall though, Terra Nil is quite a zen experience. I thought the learning curve was really well done as ideas and concepts slowly expand on each other, and I liked how later stages challenged you more on your approach. It's also just really enjoyable watching these different worlds spring up, even with all their flaws, all their curves and all their edges, all their perfect imperfections. Not only that, but I found the music quite calming too, and I really liked how it would react to things that you were doing in the game. I thought the graphics and animations were top notch as well, and watching the whole world light up and come alive is a joy. I think Terra Nil is just a great example of a game where the design and gameplay matches the overall theme and message. I do have some complaints though. First, I would say the game is a bit limited, maybe by design. There's only 4 maps in the main game with a variation of each map available after beating the campaign. While I did like the variations and thought some of them did a great job of changing things up, I still just think that maybe there wasn't enough content. I know you can generate new maps and replay stages with different difficulty settings, but I do think some additional modifiers or curveballs were much needed. During the campaign, there's this really awesome moment which I won't spoil here, but it really took me by surprise and I wish they did more stuff like that. They also just have some ideas which I think weren't really that well thought out. Really, I'm referring to the 4th stage where they change things up a bit and make you scan for seeds across all the territories you restored. It's a cool idea and concept, but the execution is just so poorly done that I feel like they really shouldn't have included this minigame at all. I think outside of that, I mainly wish we were able to save down, revisit, or change up maps that we previously played. You can start new runs and whatnot, but since there is such a set list of objectives, I do feel like the overall replayability of the game is pretty limited. The devs actually say that this is maybe by design, as they didn't want to make a game that was infinitely replayable. But at the same time, isn't a game that you can keep coming back to one which fits the theme of recycling? Regardless, I'd say the game length is probably the biggest knock against the game, and you can honestly probably beat the entire game in under 15 hours, and that's maybe being generous. So, is Terra Nil worth the $25 price tag? Personally, I'd probably say, not quite. I think it's a very cohesive experience that does exactly what it sets out to, but again, I do think maybe it's just a bit too short. I would say whether or not it's worth it for you depends on how you might approach the game. If you think you can find joy in simply creating colorful worlds and maybe don't need the modifiers or additional stages, then yeah, I think you can probably pay full price. But for most other players, I'd probably suggest waiting for the game to be maybe around the $12 or so range. Around half off sounds about right. And of course, as I was editing this review, I actually saw that they did say they plan on adding more content to the game, so at release, my opinion doesn't really change too much, but I do think it could become more worth it with time. I do think it's worth noting though that a portion of all profits from the game will go to the Endangered Wildlife Trust, so you can also think of it as helping to support charity, if that's something that appeals to you. So yeah, I think everything in consideration, I'm giving Terra Nil a 3.3 out of 4. A very solid experience all around, which I would recommend, but on sale. But hey, that's just me. Let me know down below what you think. And if you enjoyed the video, maybe consider hitting some of those buttons. And as usual, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Peace.